Jerod Santo, welcome to the work item. Great chatting with you.
Hey, Dan. Thanks for having me.
I want to right off the bat start with Changelog because you're the co-founder of Changelog, and I myself ran into Changelog, and I want to say 2021 when one of my blog posts on user hostile software got aggregated on Changelog at the time. And I looked at my refers and I was like, what the heck is changelog? And then I started digging through it. And then I went down the rabbit hole of a bunch of podcasts and posts. And I saw that this guy, Jerod, was running a bunch of things and was popping up on all these podcasts and shows. So tell us more. What is changelog and how did you start it?
Changelog is, I guess we call it a media company now. It's a blog network. We have a portfolio of weekly developer-focused shows that we do. And there's a news component, which we call Changelog News. And so we are all about the software world, helping people keep up, find interesting things, talk about interesting things, and talk to interesting people about hopefully interesting things. We've been doing that for a long time. I am a co-owner of the business, not a little trivia, not actual co-founder, because I've been with Changelog for over 10 years now. My business partner, Adam Stakoviak, founded it back in 2009 with another guy named Win Netherland. Win went on to get a job at GitHub. And of course, back then, podcasting was just a hobby for everybody. So it was not a business then. And I was a freelance consultant doing software development under my own business name, and loved listening to the show, loved reading the blog, keeping up with open source software through it, saw it start to fade a little bit and thought I could help out as I was a business owner. So I had free time that I could just allocate towards getting involved, and I began blogging for Changelog.
So it
And
was
about a
very
year
much
later, began
a
co-hosting the show with
serendipitous
Adam.
kind of
And
transition to
then
becoming the co-owner.
eventually it
Like it's
grew
not
into
just
what
out
it
of
was. It's the
nowhere.
two. That's right. So I definitely saw value in it early on because I was a consumer that a lot of people didn't see. And Adam, my partner, had a really hard time getting other people to see the vision that he saw of how valuable this could be for people. But I saw it because I was one of those people who was like, I loved listening and hearing the lives of software developers, their decision-making processes, what they invest their time in, and then also just keeping up with new tools and techniques. As a developer who was really out on an island in Nebraska, working by myself for small clients, felt very much out on my own. It really made me feel connected to a larger community. And so I decided to invest in small ways over time. And I could see some value that I guess other people couldn't see. Adam saw it obviously. And I guess that proved out to be good because over time it's grown. And eventually he began to go full time. And then eventually I began to go full time as we scaled down my consulting business. So yeah, it's gone really well. It's been kind of organic and slow and steady. That's one of our monikers, but we enjoy it. And thankfully other folks seem to enjoy it as well.
Yeah, and you had a blog post recently that was talking about this. The changelog has never gone viral.
Right.
And I think that kind of resonated with me because you were talking about how, if you think about your common podcasts and shows, the virality factor of it comes from, as you called out on the blog post, somebody coming in like Jeff Bezos is going to be talking on the show and everybody wants to share that. But that's, one in a million. And then all the other podcasts and blogs and communities have to kind of do this steady long game. And I think that's uncommon because a lot of folks nowadays in the age of, TikTok and YouTube, and everybody wants to have like the one viral video that's going to propel me to fame. And then that
Right.
rarely works. And you're taking the approach of saying, you know what? The long game is what it's all about. We're going to take the steady stream of high quality content and go from there. It's like, talk to me more about kind of the motivations that you have for that.
I would be lying if I said I wouldn't take the viral moments as well. Of course, I would be happy to. We've had some viral moments with some of our content. It's just not our podcast content. Some clips, some blog posts have gotten very popular from time to time. But yeah, those are kind of like when you close your eyes and swing the bat and then you happen to just crack a home run. And then you think, well, that was awesome, but it's not a strategy. I can't just close my eyes and swing the bat every time. I'm not going to hit a home run again. And so chasing that is kind of in vain. Um, But again, going back to being a listener of podcasts and a person who has been profoundly impacted by other people's podcasts, I know that there is a intimacy in a conversation. There's a trust that you gain over time with people, and you can rely upon independent podcasters. I've found to really have deep impacts, maybe for with a much smaller audience than what you're going to find on TikTok. But what kind of impact do you want to make? Do you want to make a broad impact or a deep impact, or maybe both? Of course, we would all take both if we could. But given the choice, I will take the deep impact. And that's kind of what that post was about. It wasn't complaining that we've never gone viral. It's just kind of factual and saying, actually, it's okay because here we are. We are both, happy people who can raise our families and do work that we're enjoying, and we can have an impact on people. And it may not be a million people all at once, but maybe it's a few thousand people in a deep way. And I think that podcasting really does afford that because of the medium, but it's hard and it takes time, and there's no shortcuts really unless you already have an established audience or, some other medium. And so because of that, it's toil. Like, you're doing podcasts now. Like, you just got to show up and put out a show every week or whatever your cadence is, and you got to edit it and you got to name it and you got to promote it and you got to just keep on doing that hamster wheel of content creation as we come to know it by. And it's hard to do that over the long term if you don't have any sort of like positive feedback loops.
So in your case, you are running quite a few shows. Like I'm the most familiar with JS Party, but you have a few others in the kind of the network.
Yeah.
How do you scale it in a way that doesn't burn you out? Because you are an active participant in a lot of them. You're not just somebody that kind of sits on the sidelines and says, you know what, I'm just the manager of it. I arrange things and you all go and film it. You actually do this.
That's a hard question. And that's one that we've tried to do and failed and tried other things. How do we scale it? Well, the first question is like, do we scale it? And that's the first thing that we had to talk to ourselves. Like, okay, do we want to scale it? Because bigger isn't always better. What kind of lifestyle do we want to have? And how much do we want to work? And how much stress do we want to have? And so we did at some point decide that the Changelog, which is the oldest show, it's our main show, it's what the network's named after, didn't have enough, I don't know, inventory for what we liked. You think about, you got 50 shows a year with a weekly interview, take a couple weeks off, that's 50 interviews a year. And we had listeners who wanted a bunch of different types of content that show just could not serve. And so we did want to scale beyond one show. And so how do we scale it? Well, we first of all scale the voices. We don't want to just be the two of us on every podcast because A, that's pretty boring to have the same two voices all the time. B, we're not experts in many arenas, so we can be curious, but we can't have like really good takes. And C, we get burnt out. And so we decided to go out and find like-minded people who are interesting and want a podcast, but don't have all of the infrastructure and all of the stuff figured out, the workflows that we've just developed over time, and enable them to do, shows that we then produce. I do participate in a lot of those just because I enjoy it. Adam does as well. And so we end up being on those shows like JS Party. I'm a regular on there, but there's a whole bunch of people involved. And then you just scale things the way you scale business things. You hire editors, you figure out more productive ways of doing the same thing. So you're spending 30 minutes versus 4 hours, that kind of stuff. And then at a certain point we stopped. Like, we are pretty much maxed out right now. We do 5 or 6 weekly podcasts, and I could not add a 7th right now without significantly impacting my life, which I don't really want to do. So
it sounds like you're taking the approach that I think Rob Walling coined the term of like start small, stay small. Intentionally so. Like, there's not every company and business needs to be that billion-dollar, like massive. Like, you can reach a point of like, this is actually good enough in both terms of revenue and both terms of kind of the balance with the rest of your life.
yeah, you have to decide what you want in life, and if you find yourself in a privileged position to be able to make those kind of choices, then you decide what matters most. And if more money and more power and more fame or whatever comes out of building the big business bigger is what you want, then that's what you go after. But I've always desired freedom and liberty more than money. And so I could make more money with this, but I would be giving up freedom and liberty and time to do other things. And Adam feels the same way. So we're both on the same page there. Of course, we have shiny object syndrome and we have moments where, like, here's a huge opportunity. Should we seize it? And we have to talk to each other and make those decisions. But ultimately, we've always come back to we're really happy to do this work and it's satisfying work. And we just haven't decided to go ahead and scale it to the hilt and chase the dollars. And I think that's paid off. There's been times where, of course, opportunities come by and you think, maybe we took some investment, we could hire more people, we could do more. There's so much we could be doing that we aren't. And that's really the problem is, like, we could have a whole news wing. We could have way more written content. We've always wanted to have more of those posts, like the one I wrote about the changelog not going viral. Like, our whole written side of our business is pretty weak. And I know we could just make that better with money and people. But ultimately, we've chosen kind of freedom and lifestyle so far, and I think that's been a pretty good decision for where we are.
Was there any point in your life where the kind of pivotal light bulb went off about the choice of freedom and liberty versus money? Because that's I'm listening to you talk about this, and again, it's a very uncommon kind of mental model, because if you talk to folks that are starting off in their careers in tech or entrepreneurs, a lot of them are motivated by, like, I want to grab just as much money as I can as fast as I can.
My first boss out of college also happened to be a pastor at my church, so we had a very close relationship. And I'm a Christian guy, and I read the Bible and stuff. And the Bible says, like, um, if you can achieve liberty, seek liberty. It's like one of the principles is, like, be happy where you are, but if you can be more free, take more free. And he impressed that upon me at a young age. And I thought, yeah, that sounds about right. And then I started trying to live by that just a little bit in certain ways. And I found it very satisfying to trade that for other things. And a lot of times that's money. Often it's time, it's commitments. And then I've had times where I went and chased the money. And then I've asked myself, like, am I better off now? Because I've got the money, but now I've got less freedom or less time and more responsibilities. And I'm always like, actually, because I'm taken care of financially, my base needs, my family's base needs, this extra money isn't adding that much. And I traded in something that was worth more. And so I think it just kind of proved itself out to be true a few times. And so that's when I really started doubling down and saying, okay, I got to be very careful about saying yes to things that reduce my freedom.
A very intentional decision that it sounds like also it did not come out of nowhere. Like, it's not one of those things that it's like, oh, it's good enough. It's I like, there's a mental shift coming with it.
And so far, I think it's proven itself to be true. And I'm sticking with it, at least for now.
As with any part of life, it comes in waves, so things can change. But I find it an admirable mental model. Now, in terms of the community that you're running, so Changelog is pretty big, and I see a lot of focus on JavaScript, which is arguably, or JavaScript and the web, I'll put it this way, which is arguably a very fast evolving space. Like the meme about there's a new JS framework coming out every day on Hacker News somewhere, like it's happening. How do you keep up with things that are truly important for developers to know that you bring up on your shows versus the noise? Because there's a lot of noise.
Okay, so that's a hard question because you spend years and years developing what I'll just call taste, because I can't have a better word for it. And then you have some taste and you're not sure why you have it, but just because you put the time in. And then someone says, like, how did you develop that taste? And it's like, I just spent a lot of time looking at projects. I mean, I've been doing software development for 20 years. I've been in the open source world for a very long time. I've seen so many things come and go. I've seen things come and stay. And I don't want to say I have a knack for it. I just think I have a trained sense of what's good and what's maybe not so good, what's worth paying attention to, and what you can probably skip. That I just use that knack because I've just developed it over time. Also, of course, we have feedback loops. We have other people who are smart, what your friends are into. JS Party is a good example. That's a show with 8 people on it. I'm just one of the 8. And I have a very specific purview of the world. I have my own tastes. I have what interests me, and they all have that exact same thing. And so I listen to them and I say, what's interesting to you right now? Or I'll take a link and I'll send it over to Nick Nisi and say, hey, is this something that you think is worth us talking about on the show? And he may be like, yeah, let's get him on the show. And so that's like a positive reinforcement of, okay, this was a good decision. Or he'd be like, maybe, maybe not. And you're like, okay, maybe that's not so interesting. So it's being plugged into other people who are doing the same thing, caring, and then just also it's just putting the time in and trying a lot of stuff. I mean, I've played with so many software projects over the course of my career that I just have developed the skill of kind of spotting what's worth paying attention to and what's not. And of course, I still screw it up sometimes and I chase a shiny object and then it's like, it turns out that wasn't sustainable or something like that. But that's as best as I can explain it.
Yeah, you're still actively developing, right? Like you're an engineer,
Absolutely.
right? Like it's not just you reading the news, it's you're actually using things.
Absolutely. And that's really been another principle of mine is like I cannot simply become a talking head. I had a teacher in college who was an adjunct professor and he taught databases. And it was a night class because during the day he worked on databases. And he was my best teacher in college. And he was an adjunct professor who was just doing it as his day job. And the full-time professors who like their entire job was just to teach C++ or whatever, they were very unplugged. They were behind the times. They didn't teach me very much. And so that guy was a good example of me of like, you know what? Learn from people who are still doing it because they just have the real world experience. And so I always want to be still doing it and not just talking about it, not just teaching it. And so, yeah, I actively write code as often as I possibly can and play with the things myself and, get my hands into the mud.
How do you find the time for all this as a podcast host, entrepreneur, an engineer? Like that sounds like it's a lot. It would eat like out of 24 hours in a given day, like easily 23 hours.
Well, that's a good question. I guess on top of that, I also have 6 children that we homeschool and other things going on. So I coach basketball at night. I got lots of things. So not much time. Um, I don't really have a great answer of how I do it. I have to be judicious with where I invest my time. I have to not do things that waste my time. I have to set aside time for certain things, right? But I'm always prioritizing like what has to happen today, what has to happen right now. Like there's a show that goes out by 5 p.m. Like that's got to happen, and then after that, I can do those other things. And so it's just a constant battle. But just like always asking yourself what's the most important thing right now, and realizing that actually trying the stuff, coding the stuff, building stuff has to be in that list of most important things and keeping it there. That's probably the best way I can say that.
And once again, the theme of being very intentional about how you spend your time.
Yeah.
It's also like hard to prioritize things because I'm assuming if you're running that many, podcasts, I'm sure the business evolves quickly as well. And you need to catch up with a lot of things, and jumping in between kind of business mode versus software engineer mode versus I'm a father and I have to deal with this. It's a lot of context switching.
It is. Have you heard of Paul Graham's maker schedule, manager schedule? Yes. That really did help me be able to know what mode I'm in. So as a small business owner, I'm both a maker and a manager. And as a podcaster and an editor, I'm constantly in communications with people about scheduling and rescheduling and when does this have to happen and this goes out this day. And so like there's very much this manager scheduler thing where I'm like emailing, I'm calendaring, I'm doing all these things. And then I have to be able to also just like sit down and edit and master and produce a show, which could take 3 hours, or add a feature to our website, which could take 4 hours. And so you really have to switch into maker's schedule and just like go deep work focus mode and be able to block those times. And that's a struggle too, because one thing can pull you out of maker mode and back into manager mode. And I struggle to keep those things away from me, but I try my best, it's tough.
Yeah, and especially in the tech space where you kind of have to jump between a calendar invite, you have a meeting, and then after a meeting, you have half an hour empty before the next meeting. How do you feel that half hour? Like, do you actually
Right.
kind of jump into the Zen focus mode? Because that's hard. I don't know if half an hour is enough. I don't know.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
not
think
for
so.
me.
Yeah. If it's not 2 hours, I'm pretty much got to stay in manager mode. I do follow I don't even know, this is embarrassing. I don't even know if this is actually in the GTD book, but somebody else who read the GTD book told me this. And so I assume it's in there, which is if you can get it done in 2 minutes, just do it right now. And I think that's in there, but I have never actually confirmed it myself. So I don't want to spread. Okay. I use that constantly. I use that constantly. Like, is it less than 2 minutes? Just do it. And especially when I have a half an hour, because think about how much you can get done on the manager mode in a half an hour. If you're like, okay, what are all the things I can just get done right now? Mostly it's emails, it's calendaring, it's a few decisions here or there. Maybe it's fix a bug real quick. But if you don't have 2 hours, I mean, what can you really get done? That's intense.
Especially like the calendar slice in like 30 to 15-minute slices, like not very efficient for anyone.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of building developer community, so arguably you've built a very successful community with a kind of a podcast network around it. What do you think kind of sets Changelog and the work that you've done apart from the myriad of other developer communities that also might have a podcast or two, right? It seems to be the yearly trend where new things are popping up, but Changelog kind of has stood the test of time. Like what sets it apart?
You might have to ask our community for that. I think from my perspective, um, we really do care. And I think a lot of people are community building, but they're doing it because they want to have a community. And like a community is not like a toy that you have or like a thing that you acquire, like you'd buy a car. Like it's a bunch of people that enjoy the same things or rally around a common cause. And um, again, some of it goes back to the time. Like we've just been doing this a very long time. And how do you build a community? Well, you do the same stuff over and over and over again. And then people see you doing that stuff and they're like, hey, I like that stuff too. And then you're like, all right, come do it with us, come hang out. And so I think there's a sincerity, like we really do care about the people that we talk to and talk with and hang out with in our community. We don't have a huge community. I mean, there's bigger ones out there, but we've just kind of like, again, slow and steady rolling down the road together. You just pick up people and then they become, there's people in our Slack community that have been hanging out with me for years and we know them very well just because that's what happens over time. So a little bit of sincerity, a little bit of just sticking to it and um, providing a place that people actually want to hang out.
Are there any aspects of the community building process that you're undertaking that you'd say are unique to Changelog? Because you kind of alluded to the fact of like this community in Slack, and there's so many of them that keep popping up, and I get invites, and then like all the times, like, oh, join this product manager community, the Slack with like 12 people, and there's just a lot of them, and it all at some point devolves into community members sharing links to blog spam and blog posts, and it just becomes like, all right, this is not a community, this is just like a link aggregation service that is kind of useless.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've definitely had people that pop in and want to use our community like that. And that's been the main moderation move. I mean, because I don't even count, there's thousands of people that hang out together, but probably like regulars that are like regularly chatting. It's probably like 100 of us, with thousands lurking, which is totally cool because I also lurk in other communities as well. But the main moderation I've had to do is like, hey, don't come here and just spam us with your stuff because people want to use communities for exactly that. Like act like they've been here for a while and like, hey, I'm just, running a survey. It's like, you can't just come in here and pop your survey in. Sorry. So we are pretty quick on the delete button for that kind of stuff. I don't think there's anything, and I don't think I have any tips or tricks or anything unique to us. We've been putting out shows for a long time. So people that like our shows like to hang out together. And that's kind of just the way it is.
Were there any moments since kind of you started working on Changelog that kind of looking back, you'd say are your biggest lessons? It sounds a little cliche, but effectively maybe things that you'd say like, wow, that was a teaching moment.
So this wasn't a moment, but I think that it's taken time, but it has been profound to me, learning the power of just consistently showing up, like just the consistency, and how compounding consistency is when you're building something. I think that we've had times where we've been less consistent with it, even with just production. So I don't know if you listen to podcasts like I do, but I'm also a podcast listener to this day. And I have podcasts that I love, and they become a part of my life. I integrate them into my life. And, I expect them to be there for me at certain times. So if a show like if a show that usually publishes on Friday morning doesn't publish that week, or it's like Saturday afternoon, maybe I've just moved on and it doesn't fit anymore. So like podcast listeners, they're hard to acquire. They're hard to find and acquire as like somebody who's going to be there. But once they listen, like if you give them good stuff consistently, they're going to listen for years. And I'm one of them. I will listen to a show for years. But it has to like fit into where I fit it into my life. And so that habitual listener, which I don't think many people think about, but we definitely think about, is the one who can't wait for your show to drop because they're used to it dropping at this time or day, and it's their Friday afternoon jog, or it's their commute on Monday morning, or whatever it is. And during times of inconsistency, we had a really hard time building anything, even though I think the quality was there of our shows and we were putting all the effort in, but we were just inconsistent, and those shows just stagnate. But just the consistency, whatever cadence you decide, whether it's weekly, daily, bi-weekly, monthly, and I think weekly is the best balance of all of that, which is why most of our shows are weekly. Just staying consistent and just like being there for people is really something I learned. It's just very effective, and it makes things grow. And that took a while. That took a while to figure out.
What's interesting about this is specifically into kind of the domain of podcasts. I think that consistency is especially discouraging to newer entrants because podcasts kind of blew up. We saw like a few years back, like Spotify got into it, and there's this kind of flood of new people coming in and saying, I will have a podcast too. And then 2 episodes in, 4 episodes in, 5 episodes in, they still don't see like the thousands of followers coming in. And people just kind of like, you know what? Like, I'll skip this week. I'll skip next week. Oh, we'll do it next month. And it just never grows. And it kind of struck me that there was some stat shared recently that was like the median podcast length is 7 episodes, after which people just drop off. They're like, they just completely lose desire to continue. It's like, wow. And then the podcasts that do survive, like JS Party, like Podcasts in Your Network, are the ones that kind of keep on pushing, despite the fact that like maybe the growth is not as astronomical initially as you hoped it would be.
Yeah, that rings true. And we've been doing it long enough that we've seen so many people come in and start throwing podcasts. And some are scary, from like, okay, they're going to take some of our audience away, you know, or they're big names, or they have big budgets and large organizations behind them. Of course, at a certain point, all enterprises need to have a podcast. And, we're sitting here thinking like, is anybody going to have time to listen to our shows when they're going to be listening to, some FANG members show, some large entity that has a huge budget and can put out all this stuff. And, most of those are gone now. I mean, so many podcasts are just gone. Even the good ones, sadly, don't survive. We have in our portfolio shows that are like, we've had trouble keeping all of our shows alive, and we're trying really hard because they have to be sustainable. And yeah, the consistent ones, the ones who are dedicated, which really does require you to have some sort of, I don't know if extrinsic is the right word, but like some sort of other motivation that's feeding it in order for you to continue. Like there's some shows where it's friends getting together and talking, and like they'll do that forever, right? Because they just enjoy getting together and talking, and maybe it's their excuse to talk once a week or once a month. And those shows are awesome, and those people tend to survive because they just love to get together and talk about whatever the hobby is. And so that's just one example of like, that's their motivation. It's not the audience. It's not the listens. It's not the money. It's that opportunity to get together. And so if you have something like that, In a lot of cases is your own learning. Like, well, I'm just learning. I want to keep learning. It's a good excuse to talk to smart people on a microphone who otherwise wouldn't like spend an hour with you. But now they're going to teach you stuff. Like that's a great motivation that keeps podcasters going. And eventually those podcasts do grow.
It's an interesting balance though, because you kind of talked about the example of friends talking, and this was another thing that, especially in the past few years, like since the pandemic, um, you saw people kind of jump on the mic, and there's like, oh yeah, two friends talking, right? It's like it's just kind of rambling for like an hour, and then you start listening to that show. It's like, well, but nothing useful for the audience was actually there. It's
Right.
just two people talking. So it's kind of the balance of like, sure, they're not maybe motivated by growing a large following, but at least the content is somewhat useful.
Which I mean, to a certain extent, I was contradicting what we do because we don't really do any of the just friends talking stuff. Like we do joke around, and we've added a talk show to our lineup, which is more chill and more conversational than our other shows. But we're about education, really, you know. And so if we're not exposing you to new things or new ideas or new people, what are we really doing? We're not going to talk about the weather or our food or that kind of stuff and just waste people's time because I got very frustrated with podcasts where I'd show up for the topic, but the topic would be buried 20 minutes into small talk between the two hosts. And it's like, let's not be those people. So there's definitely a time and a place and certain, I mean, if it's a show about movies and friends are getting together to talk about a movie, but they're talking about what they had for breakfast the whole time, it's like this goes to another one of our mottos, which is give the people what they came for. We very much believe in giving them what they came for and not something else. And so, yeah, there's a balance there. I just saying that like if you get together with your friends and you enjoy that, you're more likely to do it ongoing. But maybe your show just stinks anyways. I don't know.
Oh, that totally makes sense. And so, in the context of the work that you're doing with Changelog, one of the things that you do sometimes, I see these like very interesting, like off, like takes that you get. And these takes are, so some things like wasted time if you're spending a lot of time building your like editor configuration and all these things. But the other piece was something stood out to me recently where I ran into one of your clips that was soft skills and the focus on importance of soft skills for developers. And this is something that a lot of developers neglect. And as a podcast host yourself, as somebody that runs a community, I'm sure you are the one that appreciates kind of the value of soft skills the most. How do you see kind of developers in the modern tech space evolving those soft skills? Because I see it so commonly where folks have a hard time kind of communicating their ideas. They have a hard time soliciting feedback and reacting to said feedback. They have a hard time putting things in writing. Like there's a lot of these things that are not implicitly kind of technology related,
Mm-hmm.
but are key to success. And something that, again, you said it and like it just went off for me. It's like, oh my gosh, this is like exactly that I wish more people knew about.
Well, I can't speak for all of the developers out there, or the engineers, or the programmers, whatever they want to call themselves this time of year. Um, and maybe I'm in a bubble because we do tend to speak with developers who like to speak on podcasts, and they're polished with some of their at least communication skills. Which for me, communication skills are the cross-cutting most valuable skill you can have in your life. The ability to communicate. It helps you in your career, it helps you in your relationships, it helps you get what you want, it helps you not get what you don't want. I mean, to be able to communicate, which is a very hard thing, and one that I think all of us are still constantly learning how to get better at, or not, um, is a superpower, especially for software engineers where you already have a power, but you can't necessarily wield it to its full strength without being able to convince somebody that this is a good idea, or defend a decision that you made, or show your manager that you are very productive and here's how you went about solving problems. I mean, it's so valuable. And I think that the people who are plugged, at least the people who are plugged into our community, know that, and they seek ways of improving that. And so they're reading the books, they're listening to the podcasts, um, they're trying to improve not just their engineering skills. Because at the end of the day, yes, programming is hard, but it's nowhere near the hardest thing that we have to do in our jobs. And the people who realize that are the ones who transcend, and they get the promotions and they get the raises and they start their own businesses and they just have success. And the rest of them, we just stay writing code, and some people are happy to do that, and that's fine. But there just isn't really a path to progress if you're not willing to round out, make yourself a full-fleshed human being.
Do you think that you being a podcast host and kind of running your podcast network helped you hone that skill of
Oh,
communication?
absolutely. Absolutely. Just the ability to listen, which is really hard for a lot of people, because and for young Jerod as well, was more difficult because I was more waiting for my turn to talk when I was younger, because I was going to show you what I know. Like, you show me what you know, now I'll show you what I know. I wasn't ever listening. I was just waiting for my turn. And I see that, especially in young people, but I see that in lots of people where I can tell, oh, you're not listening to me. You're just waiting. You're waiting for your turn. And as an interviewer, of course, the main thing that you have to do is listen, which is hard because life is distracting and my thoughts are very entertaining to me. And maybe yours aren't quite as entertaining to me right now because you just keep talking. And I'm trying to, it's hard. And of course, just by interviewing people hundreds of times, you're going to get better at it. You're going to start listening more and reacting to what they say and not just reading the next question that you've written down. And I was terrible at that, but then I did it 100,000 times, and now I'm just a little bit less terrible than I used to be.
It comes with experience.
Yeah.
And consistency.
That's right. That's how you get the experience. You keep showing up.
I love this. I feel like this show was packed with a lot of gems that are, I want to say, like reusable in a lot of domains, not necessarily tech. But I always wrap up the episode with a question for my guest that is, if you think of a piece of unconventional advice that stems from your experience that you would advise somebody younger that is early in their career, maybe they're contemplating of starting a company similar to the one that you're working on right now, what would that be?
I don't know if this is unconventional, but I think it's perhaps so obvious that people don't say it. And so I'll just say the obvious. And I'll say that if you do this one thing, regardless of your career path, you will find success. And that's this. It's not hard. Well, let me say that again. It's not complicated. It is hard. And it's this. When you tell somebody that you're going to do something, then you do it. No matter what, do it. That's it. That's the tip. And that applies in any career. And that's so rare to find somebody who consistently does what they say they're going to do. They follow up afterwards. They send that email. They deliver the message. Whatever it is, they finish the chore. They do the backup. Whatever it is, if you just do the things that you said you were going to do, you will be so valuable to so many people, not just in the workplace, but especially in the workplace. And everybody will want to have you around, and they're going to want to give you things to do, and they're going to invest in you, because that's a very hard thing to accomplish. But if you just set your mind to it, like, oh, I said I was going to do this, I better do it, and then you do it, you'll find success.
I love it, especially given that it's very easy to slip out of that mode. And what you just described as it's being very common in young people, you definitely see a lot of that. Like, oh yeah, I'll give you that review by tomorrow, and tomorrow comes,
right?
Review is never there. Like, oh, it slipped my mind. I'll do it later next week. The next week comes, and it's still not there.
There's 1,001 reasons why you might not get something done, but if you're the person that does get the thing done they said they're going to do, people will just bring you more and more of work, more and more business, more and more raises, because that's so valuable. It's just reliable and a finisher. It's easy to start things. It's hard to finish them. So if you become a finisher, then you're on the right path.
Unstoppable. What a way to wrap up this episode. Jerod, thank you so much for being here. Where can folks learn more about the things that you build, the things that you do?
Pretty much all of my work in this domain is found at changelog.com.
And we'll make sure to include the links to all the podcasts, Changelog. It's all in the show notes, so make sure to check it out. Jerod, thank you again for being here.
Thank you. This was awesome.